Story 1. Unmarked grave. The crying started exactly 30 seconds after I closed the cemetery gates. I am the night watchman at Lone Fir Cemetery in southeast Portland. My name is Martin Cole, 43 years old, former security guard, divorced, living alone in a studio apartment 3 blocks from the cemetery. I took this job 8 months ago because it was quiet, paid okay, and nobody bothered you during the overnight shift. Just walk the grounds, check the locks, make sure nobody breaks in to vandalize headstones or film stupid ghost hunting videos. Easy money. That's what I thought. That's what I believed until I heard her. The woman who cries over a grave that doesn't exist. The woman who has been mourning for over 100 years. The woman who won to let me leave. Lone Fir is old, established in 1846. One of the oldest cemeteries west of the Mississippi. 30 acres of moss-covered headstones and towering Douglas firs in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Over 25,000 people are buried here. Some graves are marked, elaborate monuments, family plots, names and dates carved in granite and marble. But many errant, especially the old ones, the poor, the forgotten, the people who died with nobody to mourn them. Their graves are just depressions in the earth, barely visible, lost under decades of fallen leaves and overgrown grass. The Cemetery Foundation has been trying to map them all, to document every burial. But it is slow work, and some graves refuse to be found. My shift runs from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. 8 hours. Most of it spent in the small security office near the main entrance. A converted groundskeeper, a shed with a space heater, a desk, and a coffee maker that makes everything taste like rust. I do rounds every 2 hours, walk the perimeter, check the fence line, shine my flashlight through the old sections, make sure everything is secure. The first few months were boring, peaceful even, just me and the dead, the city sounds filtering through the trees, distant traffic, the occasional siren, sometimes a homeless person trying to sleep among the graves. I'd wake them gently, direct them to shelters, never had any trouble. The crying started in late October. I was doing my midnight round. The air had that autumn chill, that smell of wet leaves and earth. My breath came out in white clouds. The cemetery was silent except for my footsteps on the paved paths. I was near the pioneer section, the oldest part. Some headstones dated back to the 1850s, gold rush era, people who come west looking for fortune and found graves instead. That's when I heard it. Soft at first, so soft I thought it was wind through the trees. But it wasn't the wind, it was weeping, a woman crying, deep, wrenching sobs, the sound of someone whose grief was so complete, so total, that nothing else existed. I followed the sound, through rows of headstones, past weathered angels and crumbling obelisks. The crying grew louder, more distinct. It was coming from the southeast corner, an area without many markers. Just open grass, just the faint outlines of sunken graves. I swept my flashlight beam across the ground. Nothing, nobody, but the crying continued, right in front of me, so close I should be able to see whoever was making that sound. I called out, identified myself as security, said I was here to help. The crying stopped, instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. The silence that rushed in was worse. Heavy, expectant, like the cemetery itself was holding its breath. I stood there for a full minute, waiting, listening. Nothing, just normal night sounds, distant traffic, wind in the branches, my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I convinced myself it had been an animal, a cat maybe, or a raccoon. Urban wildlife makes strange sounds sometimes. Sounds that can trick your brain, make you hear things that aren't there. I finished my round, went back to the office, made coffee, wrote a note in the logbook, heard unusual sound near pioneer section, investigated, nothing found, probably animal. I forgot about it, moved on. That was my first mistake. The crying came back the next night. Same time, same location, midnight, southeast corner. I was ready this time, brought a better flashlight, my phone to record audio. I wanted evidence, proof that I wasn't imagining things. The moment I entered the pioneer section, it started. That same heartbreaking weeping, that same sense of grief so profound it felt physical, like the air itself was heavy with sorrow. I hit record on my phone, swept the flashlight across the area, and I saw her, just for a second, a figure in a dark dress, kneeling beside a patch of bare earth, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Then my flashlight beam hit her directly, and she vanished, just disappeared, like she'd never been there. But the crying continued, all around me now, not from one location, from everywhere, from the ground, from the trees, from inside my own head. I backed away, fast. The crying followed, growing louder, more insistent, more desperate, like whoever was making that sound needed me to understand something, to see something, to know something. I ran back to the office, slammed the door, stood there breathing hard, hands shaking. The crying stopped the moment I crossed the threshold. I checked my phone. The recording was corrupted, just static, just white noise, nothing useful, nothing that would prove what I heard. I called the cemetery director the next morning, a woman named Helen, late 60s, been managing lone fir for 20 years. I told her what happened. She went quiet for a long moment. Then she asked if the crying came from the unmarked section. I said yes. She sighed, said she hoped it wouldn't start again. Said there'd been reports before. Other night watchmen, volunteers, visitors who stayed too late, all describing the same thing. A woman in dark clothing, crying over a grave with no marker, no name, no identification. Helen said the local historians had researched it, found references in old journals and letters. Stories about a woman who come to the cemetery every night in the 1890s. Who mourned someone buried in an unmarked grave. Who had been warned repeatedly that the cemetery closed at sunset. Who had been found one morning dead among the graves. Heart failure. They buried her somewhere in Lone Fir, but nobody remembered where. Her grave was never marked either. Helen said the crying usually lasted a few weeks, then stopped. She asked if I could handle it. Said she understood if I wanted to quit. Said she had 3 night watchmen leave over the years because of this. But I needed the job, needed the money. So I said do you stay? Said I could deal with it. That was my second mistake. Because the crying wasn't just going to last a few weeks this time. This time was different. This time she wanted something. And she wasn't going to stop until she got it. The third night, I didn't go near the pioneer section. I stayed in the office. Let her cry. Let her mourn. I wasn't getting paid enough to confront ghosts. But around 2 in the morning, the lights started flickering. The space heater shut off. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in less than a minute. I could see my breath, could feel the cold seeping into my bones. And the crying, it was right outside the door, right outside the thin wooden barrier between me and whatever was out there. The door handle turned, slowly. I delocked it. I know I delocked it. But it turned anyway. The door opened. And she was standing there, the woman in the dark dress, Victorian-era clothing, high collar, long sleeves. Her face was pale, gaunt. Her eyes were hollow, not figuratively, literally hollow, just empty spaces where eyes should be. But I could feel her looking at me, could feel her attention like a weight, like pressure. She raised one hand, pointed behind her, toward the pioneer section, toward the unmarked graves. Her mouth opened. The crying poured out, but her lips didn't move. The sound wasn't coming from her throat. It was coming from everywhere, from the ground, from the walls, from the air itself. She wanted me to follow. Needed me to follow? I shook my head, told her no, told her to leave me alone. She took a step forward, into the office. The temperature dropped further. Ice formed on the windows, on the desk, on my coffee cup. She took another step, closer now, close enough to touch. I could smell her. Earth, decay, flowers long dead. She reached out. Her fingers were gray, withered, like she'd been buried and dug up and was somehow still moving. Still searching, still mourning. I screamed, actually screamed, and she vanished. The temperature returned to normal. The lights stopped flickering. The heater kicked back on. But I could still hear the crying, faint, distant, coming from the pioneer section. I didn't sleep the rest of that shift. Sat in the office, door locked, all the lights on, watching the clock, waiting for 6 a.m. For sunrise, for permission to leave. When my replacement arrived, I told him everything. He laughed, said I'd been watching too many horror movies. Said the cemetery was just a cemetery. Dead people stay dead. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to think I imagined the whole thing. But I knew what I'd seen, knew what I felt, and I knew she'd be back. She came every night after that. Always at midnight. Always in the pioneer section. But she started appearing other places too. Near the office, by the main gates, in the chapel. Always crying, always pointing, always trying to lead me somewhere. I stopped doing rounds. Stopped leaving the office after dark. Just sat there, counting the hours, drinking bad coffee, trying to ignore the crying that never seemed to end. The cemetery director called, asked if I was okay. Said volunteers had reported seeing someone in the office who looked distressed. I told her I was fine. Told her I was handling it. I wasn't handling it. I wasn't sleeping. Wasn't eating. I lost 15 pounds in 2 weeks. My hands shook constantly. I started hearing the crying during the day. At home, in my apartment. Soft, persistent, always there, always reminding me that she was waiting, that she needed something, that she wouldn't stop until I helped her. Finally, I broke. 3 weeks of crying. 3 weeks of apparitions. 3 weeks of fear and isolation and slowly unraveling sanity. I decided to follow her, to see what she wanted. To end this, I waited for midnight, grabbed my flashlight, walked to the pioneer section. She was already there, kneeling on the bare earth, crying into her hands. I approached slowly, told her I was ready, told her to show me. She looked up, those hollow eyes fixed on me, and she smiled. Not a happy smile, a smile of relief, of gratitude, of recognition that finally, someone was listening. She stood, walked deeper into the unmarked section. I followed. She stopped at a spot that looked like every other spot. Just grass, just earth, nothing special, nothing marked. She knelt again, placed both hands on the ground. And the crying changed, became words, a name, spoken over and over. Elizabeth, Elizabeth, Elizabeth. Her daughter, buried here, unmarked, forgotten, lost for over a century. I understood then. She wasn't just mourning. She was searching, trying to find her child, trying to mark the grave, trying to make sure Elizabeth was remembered, that someone knew she existed, that her short life had mattered. I took out my phone, marked the GPS coordinates, took photos, made notes. The crying stopped. For the first time in 3 weeks, the cemetery was silent. The woman stood, looked at me one last time, and faded. Not vanished, faded. Like she was finally able to rest. Like her purpose had been fulfilled. Like she could let go. I reported everything to Helen the next morning. Gave her the coordinates. She contacted the Historical Society. They did a ground-penetrating radar scan. Found remains. A child, buried in the 1890s. They working on identifying her now. Working on giving her a proper marker. A name. Recognition. The crying hasn't to come back. The cemetery is quiet again. Just a normal place. Just headstones and trees and earth. But I still hear it sometimes. Late at night, in my apartment. Soft, distant, not sad anymore, not desperate, almost peaceful, like she is thanking me, like she has finally found what she was looking for. And I understand now, the dead dawn always want to scare us. Sometimes they just want to be remembered. Sometimes they just want someone to care. Sometimes they just need one person to listen, to hear their grief, to help them find what was lost. I'm still the night watchman at Lone Fir. Still walk those paths, still check those gates. But I listen now, really listen, because the cemetery holds more than bodies. It holds stories, and some stories refuse to stay buried until someone finally hears them. Story 2. Highway remembers I drove Highway 20 across Central Oregon for the last time 3 weeks ago, and I need to tell someone what I saw before I lose my mind completely. Before I start questioning whether any of it was real. They call it the ghosts of Highway 20. Between 1992 and 1995, at least 9 young women vanished along that desolate stretch of asphalt cutting through the high desert. Some bodies were found years later in ravines and forest clearings. Others are still missing. The killer was never caught. The case went cold. But the road remembers. God help me, the road remembers everything. I am a long-haul trucker, 42 years old. Been driving cross-country routes for 18 years. I've seen strange things on lonely highways at 3 in the morning. Deer that stand too still. Fog banks that seem to follow your headlights. Hitchhikers who vanish when you look in your mirrors. You learn to keep driving. Keep your eyes forward. Dawn, to engage with the weird. But Highway 20 is different. Always has been, even before I knew about the murders. That road felt wrong. It cuts through some of the most isolated territory in Oregon. High desert, ponderosa pine forests. Towns so small they barely register on a map. At night, you can drive for 40 miles without seeing another vehicle. Just darkness and painted lines and the endless pull of the road. My route that night took me from Bend to Albany. I made the drive hundreds of times. I knew every curve, every grade, every place where the pavement buckled from frost heave. I left Bend at 11 p.m., running behind schedule because of a delay at the warehouse. The roads were empty, temperature dropping fast, clear sky full of stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. I was 20 miles past Sisters when I saw the first one. A young woman standing on the shoulder. Long dark hair, denim jacket, jeans, thumb out, the classic hitchhiker pose. But something was off. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring straight ahead, down the road, like she was watching something in the distance I couldn't see. I pick up hitchhikers, company policy, and common sense. But as I passed her, I glanced in my side mirror. She was gone, not walking into the trees, not moving away, just gone. Empty shoulder, empty road. My hands tightened on the wheel. Adrenaline made my heart kick. I told myself it was fatigue, a trick of the headlights, shadows and imagination. I'd been driving for 12 hours. The mind plays games when you retired. But 10 miles later, I saw another one. Different woman, blonde hair, red jacket, same pose, same vacant stare. And when I checked the mirror, same result. Gone. Then another, and another. Every few miles, another young woman standing on the shoulder. Different clothes, different hair, different faces, but all of them frozen in that hitchhiking stance. All of them staring down the road at something I couldn't see. All of them vanishing the moment I passed. I stopped counting after 12. My breath was coming fast. Sweat ran down my back despite the cold. I knew what I was seeing. I knew who they were. The ghosts of Highway 20. The missing women. The unsolved cases. They were showing themselves to me. And I didn't. Do you know why? Near milepost 93, my CB radio crackled to life. I hadn't heard another trucker on the channel all night. Central Oregon routes are quiet this time of year. But now, through the static, I heard breathing. Slow, labored, like someone running or scared. Then a voice. Female, young, terrified. She said one word, just one, but it froze my blood. Help. The radio went dead. I grabbed the handset, called out, asked if anyone could hear me. Nothing, just empty static. But my GPS was acting strange. The screen flickered. The route line disappeared. Then it showed something impossible. According to the GPS, I was driving in circles. The same 3-mile section of highway, over and over, looping back on itself like a snake eating its tail. But I wasn't turning around. I was driving straight. The road stretched ahead in a perfectly straight line. Mile markers ticking past. 94, 95, 96. Linear, forward. Yet the GPS insisted I was trapped in a loop. That's when I saw the truck. An old Peterbilt, 70s model, primer gray, parked on the shoulder with its hazards on. No other vehicles in sight. No towns for 20 miles. Just this ancient truck sitting there like it had been waiting. I should have kept driving. Every instinct screamed at me to keep going. But the CB crackled again. That same voice. That same word. Help. I pulled over, grabbed my flashlight, climbed down from the cab. The night was so cold, my breath came out in clouds. The silence was absolute. No wind. No insects. No distant traffic. Just my boots on gravel and my own heartbeat in my ears. The Peterbilt's driver door was open. I approached slowly, shined my light inside. The cab was empty but not abandoned. There was a thermos on the dash, still warm when I touched it. A jacket draped over the seat, keys in the ignition. The engine was off but the battery was live, the hazard lights still blinking. On the passenger seat, I found a wallet. Oregon driver, this license. Male, age 37, name I didn't recognize. But the issue date made my stomach drop. 1994. This wallet was 30 years old. Behind the seat, I found something worse. A backpack, pink, child-sized, with a name tag, Melissa. The fabric was faded but intact. Inside were school books, a lunchbox, a jacket, all perfectly preserved, all from 1993. I backed away from the truck. My light swept the shoulder. That is when I saw them. Not standing anymore, walking. All of those women I'd seen, they were walking toward me. Coming from both directions, converging on this spot. Their faces were clearer now. I could see details, freckles, scars, the individual strands of their hair. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at the truck. And behind me, I heard a door open. Not my truck, not the Peterbilt, a third vehicle I hadn't seen. A van. Windowless, white, primer spots and rust. Engine running. I spun around. The van was parked 20 feet away. I hadn't heard it arrive. Hadn't seen headlights. It was just there, idling, with its side door open. And inside that door, in the darkness, something moved. The women kept walking. They passed me without acknowledgement, without emotion, moving toward the van like they were being pulled, like they had no choice. And I realized what I was seeing. Not ghosts, memories. The road was showing me what happened. Over and over, every night, the same scene playing out in an endless loop. This was where they were taken. This exact spot, mile 93 on Highway 20. This was where their lives ended, where they climbed into that van and never came back. I ran for my truck. Didn't look back, didn't to try to help. I know how that sounds. I know what you rethinking, but you weren't there. You didn't feel the weight of that darkness, the absolute wrongness of that van and whatever was inside it. I fired up the engine, hit the gas. My truck lurched forward. I pushed it to 70, 80, watching my mirrors, making sure nothing followed. The Peterbilt disappeared behind me. The van disappeared. The women disappeared. Just empty highway and painted lines and the cone of my headlights cutting through darkness. But here is what broke me, what I can stop thinking about. As I drove away, my CB crackled one more time. Multiple voices now, all female, all young, all saying the same thing in unison. Thank you for remembering us. I pulled into a truck stop near Lebanon at 4 in the morning. Sat in my cab shaking for an hour. When the sun came up, I checked the news, searched for anything about Highway 20, found dozens of articles, the unsolved murders, the missing women, families still searching for answers, police still following cold leads. But I found something else too, something I wish I hadn't. In 1994, Oregon State Police stopped a man driving a white van on Highway 20. Routine traffic stop, broken taillight. The driver was cooperative, license and registration clean. They let him go. 30 minutes later, a college student named Rachel disappeared from a rest stop 10 miles down the road. She was never found. The police officer who made that stop killed himself 6 months later. Left a note saying he couldn't live with what he let drive away. Said he saw something in the driver's eyes. Said he knew, but he didn't trust his instincts. Didn't follow protocol. Just let the van go. They never identified the driver. The plates were stolen. The registration was fake. The man vanished. And for 3 more years, women kept disappearing from Highway 20. I submitted my notice last week. I am done driving trucks. Done with highways and night routes and the lonely spaces between towns. I started having dreams. Every night, the same dream. I am standing on the shoulder of Highway 20. Thumb out, staring down the road at something I can't quite see. And behind me, I hear a van approaching, slowing down, stopping. And I can to move, can to run, can to scream. I just stand there waiting, knowing what is coming, knowing what happens next. My therapist says it's trauma, says I witnessed something that triggered a breakdown, says the mind creates narratives to explain stress, but she doesn't know about the photos I found. I went back during the day, drove Highway 20 in full sunlight, stopped at mile 93, took pictures of the shoulder, the trees, the roadside. When I developed them, I saw them in the background, barely visible, translucent, standing in their same poses, the same women, still there, still waiting, still trying to show someone what happened. The highway remembers. It holds onto trauma like dirt holds onto blood. And every night, when the traffic stops and the darkness comes, it plays out the same scenes, the same moments, the same horror. If you drive Highway 20 across Central Oregon, dawn, T-stop at mile 93. Dawn, to pull over if you see a broken down truck. Dawn, to answer if your CB starts acting strange. And if you see young women standing on the shoulder with their thumbs out. Dawn, to look in your mirrors. Just keep driving, keep your eyes forward, because the road is trying to show you something. Trying to make you witness. Trying to make you remember. And if you stop, if you look too long, if you try to help, you might become part of what the highway remembers. Another ghost, another victim, another story that gets told in the darkness. I am leaving Oregon, moving to Florida, somewhere flat and populated and far from lonely highways that cut through the high desert. But I know it won't matter, because they've seen them now. They've witnessed, and the dreams keep getting more vivid, more real. Last night, in the dream, I climbed into the van. The door closed behind me, and in the darkness, I saw all of them. Melissa, Rachel, the others, still there, still trapped, still waiting for someone to find them. The highway remembers, and now I remember too, and that is a burden I'll carry until the day I die. Story 3. Vortex. The human mind wasn't designed to understand certain places. I learned that truth in the Oregon caves, 300 feet underground, where gravity stops making sense and compasses spin in circles and people who go in done, they always come back out the same. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a retired park ranger, and what I am about to tell you is the reason I'll never set foot in those caves again. The reason I wake up screaming. The reason I check every shadow in my house before I go to bed. Because some things that happen underground stay with you. They burrow into your mind like parasites, and they never let go. It started in October of 1995. I was 32 years old, married, 2 kids, living in Cave Junction, a nothing little town in southern Oregon where everybody knew everybody and the biggest employer was the Oregon Caves National Monument. I'd been working as a ranger there for 6 years. Good job, steady pay, beautiful location. The caves themselves were a geological marvel. Miles of marble passages carved by an underground river over millions of years. Tourists loved them. Families, school groups, geology nerds. We gave tours every day during the season, told stories about the cave, this formation, pointed out the stalactites and stalagmites, made jokes about bats. It was safe, controlled, boring, even, until the murders. Rangers Tom Ritter and Sarah Chen were found dead on October 15th. Their bodies were discovered in one of the closed sections of the cave system. The Paradise Lost Chamber, a massive cavern that had been off limits to tourists for decades because of unstable rock formations and dangerous drops. Nobody knew what Tom and Sarah were doing down there. They'd both been experienced rangers. Both knew the rules. Both understood that you never went into the restricted areas alone. And you definitely never went into Paradise Lost. That chamber had a reputation. Local cave explorers called it the Vortex. They claimed that compasses didn't work there, that watches stopped, that people experienced vertigo and disorientation and auditory hallucinations. The official explanation was magnetic anomalies in the rock. Iron deposits. Nothing supernatural. Just geology. But the locals whispered other things. They said the vortex was a thin place. A spot where the boundary between our world and something else grew weak. They said people who spent too long there came back changed. Wrong. I didn't believe any of that. Not then. I was a practical man. A man of science. I believed in what I could see and touch and measure. So when the park superintendent asked me to help investigate the murders, I said yes. The police had already been through the scene. They documented everything. Taken photos. Collected evidence. But the superintendent wanted someone who knew the caves intimately. Someone who could help them understand how Tom and Sarah had ended up in Paradise Lost. And more importantly, what had killed them. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma. Multiple skull fractures. Massive internal injuries, like they'd been beaten to death with something heavy. But here is what didn't make sense. There was no weapon, no murder weapon anywhere in the chamber. The police searched every inch. Nothing. And the injuries themselves were strange. The forensic report described impact patterns that didn't match any known tool or weapon. The fractures were too uniform, too symmetrical, almost like the victims had been struck by something perfectly smooth and incredibly dense. A sphere of solid rock, one detective speculated. But where would such a thing come from? And where did it go afterward? I went down into Paradise Lost 3 days after the bodies were removed. The cave was closed to the public. Yellow police tape blocked the entrance to the restricted passages. I went alone. That was my first mistake. The superintendent had offered to send another ranger with me, but I declined. I told him I worked better alone. Truth was, I wanted to prove something. To myself and to everyone else. I wanted to show that there was nothing mysterious about this place. No vortex, no thin places, just rock and water and darkness. Just a double homicide that would be solved through good police work and rational investigation. The descent took 40 minutes. Through the commercial sections of the cave first, the well-lit passages with handrails and paved paths. Then deeper, into areas where only rangers went, where the lights were bare bulbs strung on ancient wiring, where the paths became rough stone and you had to watch your footing. And finally, through a narrow squeeze called the Devil's Throat. A passage so tight you had to remove your pack and push it ahead of you and crawl on your belly through 60 feet of limestone. I'd done it 100 times, but that day, it felt different, tighter, like the rock was pressing in, like the cave was trying to keep me out. Paradise Lost opened up beyond the squeeze. And, opened up. After the claustrophobic crawl through Devil's Throat, the chamber felt impossibly vast. My helmet lamp barely reached the far walls. The ceiling disappeared into darkness somewhere overhead. Water dripped constantly. 1,000 tiny echoes that made it sound like whispered conversations just beyond the reach of my light. The air smelled wrong. Not the usual cave smell of damp stone and mineral deposits. This was something else. Something organic. Like meat left too long in a warm room. The police had marked the spots where Tom and Sarah's bodies had been found. 2 sets of chalk outlines on the uneven floor. They'd been lying about 30 feet apart. Tom near the western wall. Sarah closer to the center of the chamber. Both face down. Both with their arms outstretched. like they'd been crawling away from something when they died. I played my helmet lamp over the scene, looking for anything the police might have missed. There was nothing, just bare rock. No blood. The bodies had bled out, but somehow there was no blood at the scene. The police report had noted this, theorized that the bodies had been moved. But that didn't make sense either. Why would someone kill 2 rangers, move their bodies into one of the most inaccessible parts of the cave system, position them carefully, and then leave? What was the point? That's when I noticed the formations. Scattered across the floor of Paradise Lost were dozens of perfectly spherical stones, each one about the size of a bowling ball. Smooth, dark, almost black. I'd never seen them before. And I'd been in this chamber twice before, years ago, before it was closed. These stones hadn't been here. I was certain I would have remembered them. They were too unusual, too perfect. Natural rock formations didn't create perfect spheres. I knelt beside the nearest one, reached out to touch it. The surface was ice cold and slick, like polished glass. But it wasn't glass. It was stone, solid stone. So dense it barely moved when I tried to roll it. I estimated it weighed at least 80 pounds. Then I saw the others. More spheres, dozens of them, scattered throughout the chamber, some partially buried in the cave floor, some stacked in small pyramids. And as my light played over them, I realized something that made my skin crawl. They were arranged in patterns, deliberate patterns, lines in circles and geometric shapes that couldn't be accidental. Someone had placed these stones here, carefully, purposefully. But when and why? I pulled out my camera and started documenting everything. The patterns, the individual stones, the chalk outlines. I was so focused on my work that I almost didn't notice when my compass started spinning. I clipped it to my pack. Standard safety equipment. In a cave system this complex, you needed multiple ways to navigate. But when I glanced down, the needle was rotating. Slowly at first, then faster. Spinning like a top. I tapped the case, held it level. The needle kept spinning. Then my watch stopped, just froze. The second hand stuck at 42 seconds past the minute. I shook my wrist, checked the crown. Everything seemed fine, but the watch wouldn't run, and my helmet lamp started flickering. On, off, creating a strobe effect that turned the chamber into a nightmare of frozen images. I saw the stones, then darkness, then the stones again, each time in a slightly different position. Or was I imagining that? Was the stress getting to me? I switched to my backup flashlight. Good batteries. Fresh that morning. It worked for about 10 seconds. Then it died too. Just went dark like someone had flipped a switch. And suddenly I was standing in absolute darkness. The kind of dark that doesn't exist on the surface. The kind where you can see your hand an inch from your face. Where up and down lose meaning. Where your eyes keep trying to find light that ascend to there and start creating their own phantoms instead. I forced myself to stay calm. I had another light, a chemical glow stick. I snapped it and shook it, and weak green luminescence filled the space around me. That's when I heard the sound. A low grinding, like stone scraping against stone, coming from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the walls until I couldn't tell what direction it originated from. I spun around. The glow stick cast everything in sickly green shadows. And the stones, the black spheres, they moved. I was sure of it. The nearest one had been 6 feet away. Now it was 4, maybe 3, still perfectly round, still impossibly smooth, but closer, definitely closer. I told myself I was wrong. That fear and darkness were playing tricks on my perception. But then another grinding sound, louder, and movement at the edge of my vision. Another sphere, rolling slowly across the chamber floor, by itself, with no hand pushing it, no slope to explain the movement. Just rolling. I backed away. My heel hit something solid. I looked down. A sphere, right behind me. It hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. I was certain. I checked my surroundings when I first lit the glow stick. The area behind me had been clear. But now this stone sat there, waiting, like it had always been there, like I was the one who moved. The grinding grew louder, all around me now. A dozen stones, 2 dozen, all sliding across the cave floor, all moving toward me, slowly, deliberately, converging on my position like iron filings drawn to a magnet. And I understood, finally, horribly, what had killed Tom and Sarah. They hadn't been murdered by a person. They'd been killed by the cave itself, by these stones, these impossible spheres that moved on their own and struck with enough force to shatter bone. The vortex wasn't just a magnetic anomaly. It was something alive, something aware, something that fed on people who ventured too deep into its domain. I ran, dropped the glow stick and ran blind into the darkness. My hands hit the cave wall. I followed it, felt along the rough limestone, searching for the opening to Devil's throat. Behind me, the grinding intensified, a sound like a rock slide, like an avalanche. The spheres were chasing me, all of them, rolling faster now, building momentum. I could hear them bouncing off the walls, colliding with each other, creating a cacophony that drowned out my own ragged breathing. My fingers found the opening, the narrow crack that led to the squeeze. I threw myself into it. No time to remove my pack. No time to think. Just pure animal terror driving me forward. The passage scraped my shoulders, tore my uniform, ground against my ribs. But I kept moving, crawling, clawing, kicking. Behind me, something heavy slammed into the entrance. A sphere, too big to follow, but not giving up. I could hear it grinding against the opening, trying to force its way through. And behind it, others. A whole wall of stone pressing forward, trying to reach me. I made it through Devil's throat in half the time it normally took. Didn't care about the pain. Didn't care that I was bleeding from a dozen scrapes. Just had to get out. Had to reach the surface. Had to breathe air that didn't taste like ancient death. The commercial sections of the cave felt like a sanctuary. Electric lights, paved paths, normal reality. I burst out of the entrance into afternoon sunlight and fell to my knees and vomited into the bushes. The superintendent found me there 20 minutes later. Still shaking, still hearing that grinding in my head. He asked what happened, why I looked like I'd been through a war. I told him the truth. Every word, the moving stones, the convergence, the chase. He believed me. Of course he didn't. He thought I panicked in the dark, had a breakdown, experienced a medical episode. He ordered me to take a week off, see a counselor, get checked by a doctor. And he sent a team down to Paradise Lost. 3 rangers, all experienced, all skeptical of my story. They were supposed to photograph the scene, measure the magnetic anomalies, collect samples of the spheres, prove that everything had a rational explanation. They never came back. Not alive. The rescue team found them 3 days later. All dead, all with the same injuries as Tom and Sarah. Blunt force trauma, shattered skulls, massive internal damage, and all surrounded by those black spheres. Those perfect, impossible stones that the official report described as naturally occurring concretions. Just geology, just rock. The caves were closed after that. Permanently. The entrance was sealed with concrete and steel. Warning signs were posted. The whole area was declared a geological hazard, too unstable for human access. The official story was that toxic gases had been detected. That continuing instability made the caves too dangerous. But the locals knew. They'd always known. The vortex had claimed 5 more victims. And it would claim more if given the chance. Because some places on this earth are not meant for humans. Some places belong to older things. Hungry things. Things that exist in the spaces between up and down. Between here and there. Between what is and what shouldn't. TB. I never went back. Never will. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that grinding sound. That stone on stone scraping. And I know that the vortex is still there. Still waiting. Still hungry. 300 feet underground. Behind concrete and steel. In a darkness so complete it creates its own reality. And sometimes I wonder if those spheres are still moving. Still rolling through those chambers. Still searching for someone to converge upon. Still following patterns that human minds were never meant to understand. The Park Service says the caves are safe now. Sealed. Contained. But I know better. I know that you can contain a place like that. You can only avoid it, respect it, fear it, and pray that whatever lives in the vortex stays satisfied with the 5 victims it already has. Because if it ever finds a way out, if those spheres ever roll beyond the sealed entrance, if that grinding sound ever echoes through the forests of southern Oregon, then God help us all, because the human mind wasn't designed to understand certain places. And it definitely wasn't designed to survive them. I learned that truth in the Oregon caves, in the Paradise Lost chamber, in the vortex, and I carry that knowledge like a scar, like a warning, like a debt I can never repay to the 5 people who died proving what I already suspected. Some doors should never be opened, some chambers should never be entered, and some stones should never be allowed to roll. Story 4. Last ward, I never believed in curses until I found the photograph in my grandfather's footlocker. 3 weeks after we buried him in the rain-soaked earth of Newport, Oregon. The image showed a nurse standing in front of a building I recognized immediately. Pacific View Hospital, The same hospital that burned in 1978, taking 8 souls with it. But it was the date stamped on the back that made my blood run cold. March 14th, 1978, the day of the fire. And the woman in the photograph was my grandmother, who, according to every family story I ever heard, had never worked in healthcare a single day in her life. My grandfather died without speaking. A stroke took his words first, then his movement, then finally his breath. But in those last weeks, when I did visit him in the hospice, I did catch him staring at me with eyes that held something beyond fear. They held guilt. And every time I entered the room, he did try to form words with his paralyzed mouth, the same pattern of movement over and over, until foam would gather at his lips and the nurses would have to sedate him. Now, holding that photograph in the empty house that smelled of cigarettes and Old Spice, I understood he'd been trying to warn me. The thing about small coastal towns in Oregon is that they keep their secrets like they keep their dead. Buried deep, marked with simple stones, rarely discussed. Newport was no different. I'd grown up 2 hours south in Eugene, visited my grandparents maybe twice a year, and always felt the town watching me with suspicious eyes. The locals had a way of going quiet when outsiders asked questions. Their smiles never quite reached their eyes, but I wasn't an outsider anymore. Not with my grandfather, his blood in my veins and his secrets demanding answers. The Newport Library kept newspaper archives on microfiche. Though the librarian, a woman in her 70s with hands that trembled slightly when I mentioned the hospital fire, seemed reluctant to help me find them. She told me the machine was broken. I told her I knew how to fix it. She told me the records from that year were incomplete. I told her I could take what I could get. Finally, she led me to a basement room that smelled of mildew and decaying paper, where a single microfiche reader sat covered in dust thick enough to write in. Before she left, she touched my shoulder with those trembling fingers and whispered something that made the hair on my neck stand up. Some fires done. They stop burning just because the flames go out. The Newport Register, its coverage of the fire was sparse, clinical, almost deliberately vague. 8 patients dead, cause of fire undetermined, investigation ongoing, then nothing, no follow-up articles, no conclusions, just silence, as if the town had collectively decided to stop remembering. But in the obituaries from the weeks following, I found something the librarian, this warning, had prepared me for. All 8 victims had been surgical patients. All 8 had been under the care of the same doctor, Dr. Richard Calloway. And all 8 had been scheduled for the same procedure, something called a corrective spinal fusion. I found my grandmother, this name in the hospital staff listings from 1977. Sarah Chen, surgical nurse. She worked there for exactly 14 months before the fire. After that, nothing. No employment records. No nursing license renewals. She simply stopped existing in any official capacity, moving with my grandfather to their house on the hill overlooking Yaquina Bay, where she lived as a housewife until cancer took her when I was 12. The house on the hill. The same house where I now stood, holding her photograph, realizing I'd never actually known her at all. My grandfather, his footlocker held more than the photograph. Beneath a folded flag and his discharge papers from Vietnam, I found a journal. Not his handwriting, hers. My grandmother, this neat, precise script-filled page after page, and as I read by the fading afternoon light, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The entries began in January 1978. They documented something that made my hand shake so badly I almost dropped the journal. Dr. Calloway had been performing experimental surgeries, unauthorized procedures on patients who come in for routine operations. He'd been trying to prove a theory about spinal modification, about accessing parts of the nervous system that could, in his words, unlock dormant human capabilities. The surgeries were failures, catastrophic failures. Patients woke up paralyzed, screaming, or not waking up at all. And the hospital administration knew. They'd known for months. My grandmother had reported it. She filled out incident reports, contacted the state medical board, done everything by the book. They buried every report, threatened her, told her she'd lose everything if she spoke publicly. Dr. Calloway was the son of the hospital, as founder. His family owned half the town. Some powers, she wrote, were too big to fight. The final entry was dated March 13, 1978. One day before the fire. They rescheduling another surgery tomorrow. A child this time, 10 years old. Scoliosis correction. They recalling it. I know what Richard really plans to do. I've seen his notes. This one could be a correction. This will be an execution dressed up as medicine. I can let it happen. I want to. If no one else will stop this, then God forgive me, I will. The next page had been torn out. Carefully, deliberately removed, I drove to the site of the old hospital as the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of blood and bruise. The building had never been rebuilt. The lot sat empty, surrounded by a chain-link fence decorated with no trespassing signs weathered gray by decades of coastal wind. But someone had been maintaining it. The fence was new, the lock recent, and through the gaps I could see that the foundation remained, a concrete scar on the earth that hadn't been filled or built over. Towns done to leave prime real estate empty for 47 years unless they have a reason. I parked my grandfather's old Chevy truck down the block and waited for full darkness. The street was empty. It stayed empty in a way that felt intentional, as if the whole town had an unspoken agreement to avoid this particular stretch of Ocean View Drive after sunset. The fence was easy to climb. The hard part was making myself walk across that empty lot toward the concrete foundation that emerged from the weeds like broken teeth. Every step felt wrong. The air was warmer here, noticeably warmer than it should have been on a cold October night. And underneath the smell of ocean salt and decaying vegetation, there was something else. Something chemical and burnt that should have faded decades ago. The foundation was larger than I expected, extending down into the earth where the basement level had been. Concrete stairs descended into darkness. Someone had placed a new door over the entrance, sealed with another lock, but years of coastal weather had warped the frame. With enough pressure, I managed to force it open. The smell that rose from below made me gag. Not just burnt material, burnt flesh, impossible after all these years, but unmistakable. I had my grandfather's old flashlight, heavy in metal, the kind that doubled as a weapon. I needed it for both purposes before the night ended. The basement had survived the fire largely intact, water damaged and smoke stained, but structurally sound. The beam of my flashlight revealed hallways lined with empty door frames, their doors long since removed or burned away. Patient rooms, storage areas, and at the end of the main corridor, a set of double doors with round windows, the kind that swing both ways. Operating theater. My grandmother's journal had described it. The experimental procedures had happened in Operating Theater 3, the largest room, usually reserved for complex surgeries. The room where, according to the official report, the fire had started due to faulty electrical wiring. The room where 8 patients had died, their bodies burned beyond recognition. I pushed through the doors. The operating theater's ceiling had collapsed partially, leaving twisted metal supports and chunks of concrete creating shadows that moved in my flashlight beam like living things. But the center of the room was clear, and in that center, someone had built a shrine. 8 photographs arranged in a circle on the floor. Not crime scene photos, school pictures, family portraits. The victims before they become patients. Before Dr. Calloway had gotten his hands on them. In the middle of the circle sat a gas can, new and full, and a book of matches. I heard the footsteps behind me too late. I was hoping you'd come. The voice was male, elderly, cultured. When Sarah's grandson started asking questions at the library, Margaret called me immediately. This town looks after its own. You understand. Always has. I turned slowly. The man in the doorway had to be in his 90s. But he stood straight, his eyes sharp in the reflected flashlight beam. He wore an expensive coat despite the warm air, and his hands, clasped in front of him, bore the slight tremor of advanced age. Dr. Calloway, I said. Retired. But yes, he smiled, and it was the smile of a man who never faced consequences for anything in his life. Your grandmother was a problem, a severe problem. She didn't understand vision. She didn't understand that progress requires sacrifice. Those patients, they were already sick, already dying, some of them. I was trying to help. You were butchering them. I was pushing boundaries. His voice hardened. I was on the verge of a breakthrough that would have revolutionized neurosurgery. But Sarah couldn't see beyond her narrow ethics. She threatened to go to the newspapers, to the federal authorities. She would have destroyed everything my family built. So you burned it down yourself. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. You killed 8 people to cover up your crimes. You let them burn alive. Sarah killed them. He said it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. She started the fire. I have witnesses who saw her enter the building that night with accelerant. I have documentation of her increasingly unstable behavior in the weeks before. The investigation concluded it was accidental, caused by wiring. But I know the truth. She meant to destroy my research. The patients were unfortunate collateral damage. You, really lying, am I? He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket, tossed it at my feet. Read it, her confession, written in her own hand. She gave it to me the night of the fire, begging me not to have her prosecuted. I agreed, on the condition she disappear. Never practice nursing again. Never speak of what happened. She accepted those terms. Your grandfather knew everything. He helped her hide. They lived with that guilt until it killed them both. I picked up the paper with shaking hands. My grandmother's handwriting. Neat. Precise. Unmistakable. I started the fire at Pacific View Hospital. I am responsible for the deaths of 8 patients. God forgive me. She did it to save that child, I whispered. You were going to operate on a 10-year-old. I was going to cure a 10-year-old. Calloway stepped into the room. The boy had severe scoliosis. His spine was compressing his organs. He had maybe 2 years to live. My procedure could have saved him. Your procedure would have left him paralyzed or dead like the others. You don't. Do you know that? No one knows that because Sarah burned my research. 40 years of notes. 40 years of carefully documented procedures. All gone. His hand drifted to his coat pocket again, and this time he pulled out a small revolver, the kind elderly men keep for protection. But I rebuilt it, started over, and I am not going to let another member of her family ruin it again. The gun looked small in the flashlight beam, almost toy-like, but I'd been in the army. I knew what even a small caliber bullet could do in this concrete tomb. I raised my hand slowly. There are people who know I am here, I lied. No, they're Aaron T. You came alone. You've been alone since you arrived in Newport. This town doesn't talk to outsiders, and you've been asking the wrong questions to the wrong people. Margaret told me everything. You were just like Sarah, stubborn, self-righteous, certain you know better than those of us who actually tried to help people. He raised the gun, his hand remarkably steady for a man his age. They'll all find you down here eventually. Weeks from now, maybe months. The grandson of the arsonist returned to the scene of his grandmother's crime, overcome with guilt. Suicide, obviously. Tragic, but understandable. These things run in families. I had seconds, maybe less. My hand tightened on the flashlight, measuring the distance between us, knowing I'd never cover it before he fired. Then I smelled it, not the old burnt smell that had permeated the basement, but fresh smoke. New fire? Calloway smelled it too, his eyes widened, gun wavering. The smoke was coming from behind him, from the hallway we both entered through. Thick gray smoke that moved wrong, that seemed to pour into the room with purpose rather than drift. And in that smoke, shapes were forming. 8 shapes, some tall, some short. One child-sized. No, Calloway whispered. No, this isn't possible. The shapes had faces. I could see them in the smoke, their features formed from ash and shadow. They were the faces from the photographs on the floor, but wrong, twisted, showing what the fire had done to them. Showing what dying in agony looked like. Calloway started screaming. He fired the gun. Once, twice, 3 times, the reports deafening in the enclosed space. The bullets passed through smoke and accomplished nothing. The shapes kept coming, and now I could hear them. Not voices exactly, but the sound fire makes when it consumes. A hungry, crackling whisper that formed words I couldn't quite understand but felt in my bones. They wanted justice. They waited 47 years in the burnt foundations of this place, and now they would have it. I ran, dropped the flashlight and ran blindly through smoke that parted for me like it had made a conscious choice. Behind me, Calloway's screams reached a pitch that didn't sound human, then cut off abruptly. I didn't look back, couldn't look back. I hit the stairs and climbed, my lungs burning, my heart hammering, expecting every second to feel hands made of smoke and ash dragging me back down. I made it to the fence before I finally looked over my shoulder. The smoke was pouring from the basement entrance now, thick and black and lit from within by an orange glow that had no visible source. But it stayed contained, didn't spread beyond the old foundation. It wasn't trying to burn Newport. It wasn't trying to burn anything except what it had already claimed. Fire trucks arrived 30 minutes later. I called 911 from my grandfather, his truck. told them I'd seen smoke at the old hospital site. By the time firefighters went into the basement, they found only Calloway's body. His face locked in an expression of such extreme terror that the first responder who saw it had to be treated for shock. Heart attack, the coroner ruled, brought on by extreme stress and advanced age. The small revolver in his hand suggested he'd been planning something, though what he was doing in the condemned basement of a hospital that burned before some of the responding officers were born remained a mystery the local police didn't seem interested in solving. I left Newport the next morning, took my grandmother's journal and the photograph, left everything else. Before I drove away, I stopped at the cemetery where she and my grandfather were buried side by side, their matching headstones gray in the early morning fog. I spent the night reading the rest of her journal, the entries after the fire. She had started it. My grandmother had gone to Pacific View Hospital on March 14, 1978, with accelerant and matches. But not to destroy research. To save a child. Dr. Calloway had scheduled that 10-year-old boy for surgery at 7 in the morning. My grandmother arrived at 6, after everyone but the night shift had gone home. She planned to burn Calloway's office, destroy his notes, make it impossible for him to perform the procedure. She'd been careful, made sure the patients were all in the East Wing, far from where she'd start the fire. But Calloway had moved them, transferred all 8 of his previous surgical failures to rooms directly above his office. Insurance, he called it in his notes, leverage to keep Sarah quiet. If she tried anything, his patients would burn. He'd make sure she knew it was her fault. She lit the match anyway, did what she thought was right to save one child. And 8 people died in the flames because a doctor who saw human beings as experimental subjects decided their lives were worth less than his pride. The confession Calloway had shown me was real. But it wasn't the whole truth. It never is. I left flowers on both graves. White roses for her, because she tried. Red roses for him, because he stayed silent to protect her, carrying that terrible secret until the weight of it stopped his heart. As I drove out of Newport, past the empty lot where Pacific View Hospital had stood, I saw someone standing at the chain-link fence. A woman in a nurse's uniform, her face obscured by shadow and distance. She raised one hand in what might have been a wave or a warning. I didn't stop to find out which. Some fires don't stop burning just because the flames go out. The librarian had told me that, and she was right. Newport is still burning, will always be burning, and somewhere in that town of kept secrets and buried guilt, Dr. Richard Calloway is burning too. I hope it hurts. I hope he feels every degree of it. I hope those 8 patients he butchered make sure of that. Because some sins are too big for death to erase. Some debts have to be paid in full. And some justice, the kind that matters, doesn't come from courts or cops or official investigations. Sometimes it comes from smoke and shadow and the faces of the dead, waiting patient in burnt foundations, ready to drag monsters down into the flames where they belong. I never went back to Newport. Never will. But on cold nights when I can sleep, I think about that basement, about the smoke that moved with purpose, about the way those 8 shapes had surrounded Calloway while he screamed. And I think about my grandmother, who killed 8 people trying to save one child from a monster in a white coat. I don't know if she did the right thing. I don't know if there was a right thing to do when faced with that choice. I just know that she tried, that she carried the weight of those deaths for the rest of her life, and that in the end, the dead themselves came back to set the record straight. That has to count for something. It has to. Story 5. Workshop. I found my wife. This manuscript 3 days after she killed me. Let me explain. My name was Daniel Crossan. Past tense. Because according to the state of Oregon, I died on June 2, 2018, in the parking lot of the Oregon Culinary Institute in Portland. Single gunshot wound to the chest. My wife Nancy stood trial for my murder. The prosecution said she did it for the insurance money, for freedom, for a fresh start at 63 years old. The defense said she loved me, that we were happy, that someone else must have done it. The jury took 2 days to decide. Guilty, first-degree murder, life in prison. But here is what nobody knows. Here is what I've been never told anyone until now. Nancy didn't just kill me. She wrote about it first, in detail, every step, every method, every possible way to get away with it. And I found the manuscript in her office 3 days after I died. Because I didn't stay dead. I know how that sounds. Insane. Impossible. The ramblings of someone who just lost their grip on reality. But I'm asking you to listen, to really listen, because what happened to me in Portland, in that quiet house we shared for 27 years, is more terrifying than any ghost story or urban legend. It's about the space between life and death, about what happens when someone you trust completely spends months planning your murder, about discovering that the person who sleeps beside you every night has been researching firearms and inheritance laws and body disposal methods, and about what it means to be trapped, truly trapped, in a reality where you were dead but not gone, where you can see everything but change nothing, where you watch your own murder investigation unfold and scream the truth that nobody can hear. It started with the essay. Nancy wrote it years before she killed me. 2011, maybe 2012. She was part of a writing group. Romance novelists, mostly. They met twice a month at a coffee shop in Southeast Portland to critique each other's work and talk about the publishing industry. Nancy had been trying to break into traditional publishing for years. Self-published a few romance novels. Made decent money. But she wanted more. She wanted recognition, legitimacy, a big publisher and bookstore displays, and maybe a movie deal someday. So she wrote, constantly. Romance, mystery, whatever she thought would sell. And one day, for the writing group, she wrote an essay. A joke. Dark humor. She called it, How to Murder Your Husband. I remember her reading it to me. We were sitting in the living room of our house on Westmont Place. Evening. Rain hammering the windows. Very Portland. She had her laptop balanced on her knees. She was laughing as she read. The essay was written like a how-to guide. A step-by-step instruction manual. It talked about motives, financial stress, affairs, boredom. It discussed methods, poison, staged accidents, firearms. It analyzed the psychology of getting away with murder, how to avoid suspicion, how to act like a grieving widow, how to make sure the insurance paid out. Nancy thought it was hilarious, clever, subversive. She posted it online, on a blog for aspiring writers. Got some attention, a few hundred shares. Then everyone forgot about it. Everyone except Nancy. Do you know she'd gone back to that essay? Do you know she'd been refining it, expanding it, turning it from a joke into something else, something darker, a blueprint, because that's what I found 3 days after I died. In her office, in a folder on her computer labeled research. Not just the original essay, but pages and pages of notes. Questions she de-Googled. How much does a Glock 17 cost? Where to buy a gun without a background check? How long does it take for insurance companies to investigate suspicious deaths? What happens to joint bank accounts when one spouse dies? How to delete browser history permanently? She'd been planning this for months, maybe years, and I never suspected a thing. The morning of June 2nd started normal. I was teaching a summer session class at the Oregon Culinary Institute. I'd been a chef instructor there for 15 years. Good job. I loved it. Loved teaching young people how to work a knife, how to build flavors, how to turn raw ingredients into something beautiful. Nancy had kissed me goodbye that morning, told me she loved me, reminded me to pick up milk on the way home. Just another Saturday, just another class. I taught from 8 to noon, knife skills and basic stocks. Then I walked to my van in the parking lot. The institute is in Southwest Portland, industrial area, not much foot traffic on weekends. I remember reaching for my keys, remember the sound of footsteps behind me. Fast, purposeful. I started to turn. Then the gunshot. Loud, impossibly loud, pain in my chest like someone had shoved a hot poker through my ribs. I fell, hit the pavement hard, tasted blood, saw shoes, women, shoes, running away, and then nothing, just darkness, just silence, just the feeling of everything ending. Except it didn't end. I woke up, not in a hospital, not in an ambulance. I woke up in my house, in my office, sitting at my desk, like I'd fallen asleep there. Bright sunlight coming through the windows. I looked down at my chest. No wound, no blood, no pain. I checked my watch. June 5th, 3 days after I'd been shot. 3 days after I died. I heard Nancy downstairs, moving around the kitchen, making coffee. I called out to her. She didn't respond. I walked downstairs. She was standing at the counter, staring out the window. Her face was blank, hollow. I said her name. She didn't react, didn't turn, didn't blink, like I wasn't there. I waved my hand in front of her face. Nothing. I tried to touch her shoulder. My hand passed through, like she was solid and I was smoke. That's when I understood. I was dead. My body was dead. But somehow I was still here. Still conscious. Still aware. A ghost. a spirit, whatever you want to call it, trapped in my own house. Invisible, intangible, able to see and hear everything but unable to affect anything. The first few hours were panic, pure panic. I ran through the house, tried to knock things over, tried to turn on lights, tried to make any kind of physical impact on the world. Nothing worked. I was a passenger, an observer, locked in a reality where I existed but didn't matter. I watched Nancy make phone calls, watched her talk to the police, watched her cry. Real tears, convincing tears. She told the detectives she couldn't imagine who would want to hurt me. Said we were happy, said I had no enemies. She was good, frighteningly good. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed her. But I did know, because on that first day, after the police left, she went to her office and opened her computer. And she looked at that folder, the research folder, and she smiled, a small, secret smile. The kind of smile you make when a plan comes together, when everything works out exactly as you hoped. That's when I started reading. I spent hours going through her files, all the documents she created, all the websites she visited, all the preparation she put into killing me. And buried in those files was the expanded manuscript, not just the original essay, but a full book proposal, a true crime memoir. She already written 3 chapters. The working title was How I Murdered My Husband and Got Away with It. She planned to publish it after a few years, after the investigation closed, after she collected the insurance money and sold the house and moved somewhere warm. She was going to turn my murder into a bestseller, into the career breakthrough she'd been chasing for decades. I was supposed to be her ticket, her redemption story, the dead husband who made her famous. But she made mistakes, small ones, the kind of mistakes that accumulate when you're not as smart as you think you are. She bought the gun from a private seller she met online. Thought there could be no record. But the seller remembered her, remembered the woman who paid cash and asked strange questions. She'd driven to the Culinary Institute in her own car. Thought the parking lot cameras wouldn't catch her. But they did. Grainy footage, but clear enough to identify the vehicle. And she kept the gun, hidden in the house, wrapped in a towel at the back of the closet, because she thought she might need it again someday. That's what her note said. The gun was an investment, a tool. One murder was just the beginning. The trial happened fast. 10 months from arrest to conviction. I watched every day of it. Sat in the courtroom where nobody could see me. Listened to the prosecution lay out their case. The financial motive, the struggling finances, the insurance policies I didn't she'd taken out. $2 million in coverage. She forged my signature on the applications. The witnesses, people who heard her complain about me, about being trapped in a marriage that had gone stale, about wanting adventure, freedom, a life beyond being someone, his wife. The physical evidence, the gun, the ballistics match, the cell phone records that placed her at the Culinary Institute that morning despite her claims that she'd been home writing. And finally, the essay. The prosecution entered it into evidence. Read passages out loud. Let the jury see how she fantasized about this, planned it, turned it into entertainment. Nancy's defense attorney tried to explain it away, said the essay was fiction, satire, that writers explore dark subjects all the time without acting on them. That correlation doesn't equal causation. That Nancy was a creative person being persecuted for her imagination. But the jury saw through it. They looked at her face, that blank, hollow expression she'd worn since my death. And they saw what I'd seen. They saw someone who crossed the line. Someone who had taken a thought experiment and turned it into action. Someone who murdered her husband and almost gotten away with it. Guilty, on all counts. Life without parole. She is in Coffee Creek Correctional Facility now. The women's prison in Wilsonville, about 30 minutes south of Portland. I visit her sometimes. I can move anywhere I want, anywhere my attention focuses. One of the few advantages of being dead. I stand outside her cell and watch her. She is writing again, always writing. Legal appeals, new manuscripts, letters to publishing houses. She still thinks she can turn this into something profitable. Still believes that her story has value. That people will want to read about the romance novelist who murdered her husband. And she is right. They do. There are podcasts about her. True crime shows. YouTube channels. Her name has become synonymous with a certain type of betrayal. The person you trust who is secretly planning your death. But here, it's what keeps me here. What keeps me trapped in this in-between state. It is not revenge. It It's not anger. It is something else. It's the knowledge that I never really knew her. 27 years of marriage. 27 years of sleeping beside someone. Sharing meals. Making plans. Building a life. And underneath all of it, she was someone else. Someone I never met. Someone capable of looking at me and seeing only an obstacle. Only a problem to be solved. Only a means to an end. That is the horror. Not the murder itself. Not the gunshot or the pain or the death. It's the realization that the person you loved most in the world was always a stranger. That every kiss was a lie. Every laugh was a performance. Every moment of intimacy was hollow. I think about the other men like me. The husbands who never saw it coming. Who trusted completely. Who died confused. Wondering why. And I wonder how many of them are still here. Still watching. Still trying to understand what they did wrong. What they missed. What signs they should have seen. Because that is what haunts you in death. Not the fact that you were gone, but the fact that you never really existed in the first place. At least not in the mind of the person who killed you. You were always already dead. Just a character in someone else's story. Just a plot point waiting to be resolved. Nancy will die in prison. That is almost certain. She is 68 now. Her appeals keep getting denied. The evidence is too strong. The jury, this verdict too clear. She'll spend the rest of her life in a cell. Writing. Always writing. Trying to make sense of what she did. Trying to justify it. Trying to turn it into art. And when she dies, maybe I'll finally be free. Maybe whatever force keeps me here will release me. Maybe I'll move on to whatever comes next. Or maybe I'll be trapped forever. A ghost haunting the woman who killed him. Watching her age. Watching her fade. Watching her realize, too late, that fame ISN, to worth a life. That a bestseller ISN, to worth a soul. That some stories should never be written. Because once you put certain words on paper, once you plan certain actions, once you cross certain lines, you can, to come back. You become something else. Something dark. Something that looks human but ISN. Not anymore. I found my wife. This manuscript 3 days after she killed me. And in those pages, I found the truth. Not just about my death, but about the person I married. The stranger I loved. The killer I never known. And now I'm trapped here. In this space between life and death. Between memory and reality. Between the man I was and the ghost I've become. Watching. Waiting. Knowing that justice was served but understanding that justice ISN. Enough. That nothing is enough. That some betrayals are so complete, so total, that they echo forever. In courtrooms. In prisons. In the hearts of the people left behind. And in the spaces between worlds where the dead refuse to rest. Story 6. Apartment below. I found the photographs under my daughter. It's been 3 days after we moved into the Newell Creek apartments in Oregon City. And that is when I knew something was terribly wrong with this place. They weren't our photographs. They showed 2 girls, maybe 12 or 13 years old, smiling at the camera with that innocent brightness kids have before the world teaches them to be careful. The images were dated February 2002, printed on that glossy paper everyone used before phones replaced cameras. Written on the back in looping handwriting were 2 names, Ashley and Miranda, best friends forever. I'd never seen these girls before. My daughter Emma had never mentioned them. And we'd only been living in apartment 2C for 72 hours. The Newell Creek complex sits at the edge of Oregon City, where the suburban streets start giving way to dense Pacific Northwest forest. It's one of those places that looked good in the rental photos but feels different when you're actually standing there with your boxes and your fresh start and your court-ordered visitation schedule. The buildings are older, gray siding gone darker with moss and rain. The parking lot has more potholes than pavement, and the people who live there have that look of folks who run out of better options. I was one of them now, divorced, broke, fighting for joint custody, living in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled like cigarettes no matter how much I cleaned. Emma stayed with me every other week, and I was determined to make it work. To prove to her mother, to the courts, to myself that I could be the father my daughter deserved. Finding those photographs felt like the universe laughing at my plans. Emma was at school when I discovered them. I'd been vacuuming her room, trying to make the space feel more like home and less like temporary housing. The photos had slipped between the bed frame and the wall, tucked into a gap that looked deliberate. Someone had hidden them there. Recently, based on how clean they were compared to the dust everywhere else. But Emma swore she hadn't put them there. When I picked her up that afternoon and asked about the pictures, she looked at me with those serious 9-year-old eyes and told me she'd never seen them before. She didn't know any girls named Ashley or Miranda. She'd been too busy unpacking her stuffed animals and setting up her nightlight to hide photographs under her bed. I believed her. Emma didn't lie. Not to me. That was one thing the divorce hadn't broken. So if she didn't put them there, who did? And why hide pictures of 2 smiling girls and my daughter's bedroom like some kind of message? The apartment manager, a heavy woman named Donna who worked out of a cluttered office that smelled like menthol cigarettes and wet dog, got quiet when I showed her the photographs. Really quiet. The kind of quiet that means someone knows something they don't want to talk about. She asked where I found them. I told her. She studied the images for a long time, her fingers leaving prints on the glossy surface, then handed them back like they were contaminated. She told me the previous tenant must have left them. People forgot things when they moved. Happened all the time. Nothing to worry about. Did I need anything else? Because she had a plumbing emergency in Building 3. I pressed her, asked if she recognized the girls, if they lived in the complex, if there was some reason their photos would be hidden in apartment 2C specifically. Donna's expression hardened. She told me to drop it. Told me Oregon City was a small town and some stories were better left alone. Told me if I wanted to stay in Newell Creek, I should focus on being a good tenant and a good father and stop asking questions that would only bring trouble. Then she asked me to leave her office. I drove to the Oregon City Library that evening after dropping Emma back at her mother's place. The librarian, a kind of older woman with gray hair pulled into a bun, helped me search through newspaper archives from 2002. It took 40 minutes of scrolling through microfilm before I found it. Ashley Pond, age 12, disappeared on January 9, 2002, while walking to her school bus stop at the Newell Creek Apartments. Vanished without a trace in broad daylight. Her best friend, Miranda Gaddis, age 13, disappeared from the same bus stop exactly 2 months later on March 8. The case made national news. 2 girls from the same apartment complex, same bus stop, same school, gone within weeks of each other. The community searched. The FBI investigated. Desperate parents held candlelight vigils and press conferences. But the girls had simply vanished, as if the earth had opened up and swallowed them whole. Until 3 years later when they found the bodies. Both girls had been murdered. Both had been hidden in the same location. And their killer had been living in the Newell Creek Apartments the entire time. Watching the searches, attending the vigils, helping look for the victims he buried in a concrete storage unit directly beneath his apartment. His name was Ward Weaver. He lived in apartment 1C, directly below where my daughter now slept every other week. I sat in my truck in the library parking lot for an hour, staring at the printouts I made of the news articles, feeling something cold and sick spreading through my chest. The apartment below mine, the concrete foundation where 2 girls had been entombed for 3 years. I'd been walking over their graves without knowing it. Emma had been sleeping 20 feet above where they'd been hidden. Ward Weaver was in prison now. Life sentence, multiple counts, would die behind bars. But knowing the monster was caged didn't make the apartment feel any safer. Didn't explain why someone had hidden photographs of his victims under my daughter. This bed. Didn't stop my hands from shaking as I started the truck and drove back to Newell Creek. The complex looked different now. Sinister in a way I couldn't have articulated but felt in my bones. The other tenants who I barely noticed before suddenly seemed suspicious. The shadows between buildings seemed deeper, and apartment 1C, with its darkened windows and pulled curtains, seemed to pulse with something wrong. I learned more over the following days, asked careful questions of neighbors who lived there long enough to remember. Most didn't want to talk about it. Some actually got angry when I brought it up, like I violated some unspoken rule. But a few, the ones who had been there since before the murders, shared pieces of the story in hushed voices, always checking to make sure no one else was listening. Ward Weaver had been a handyman at the complex. Friendly enough, helpful, the kind of guy who'd fix your sink or help you move furniture. He'd been close with Ashley's family. Too close, some of the neighbors said now with hindsight sharpening their memories. He paid special attention to Ashley and to Miranda. The girls had trusted him. One neighbor, an elderly man named Frank who lived in Building 4, told me something that made my skin crawl. He said Ward's old apartment had been vacant for nearly a year after his arrest. No one would rent it. Too much bad energy, Frank said. Too much history, but then the complex changed management, painted over the bad memories, and started renting it again. I asked who lived there now. Frank's expression went carefully neutral. He told me a single mother with a teenage daughter. Nice people, quiet, kept to themselves. I asked if anything strange had happened since they moved in. Frank stopped talking, told me he needed to get back inside, told me I should focus on my own family and stop dwelling on the past. But as he walked away, he looked back once and said something that echoed in my head for hours afterward. He said the past doesn't always stay buried, no matter how much concrete you pour over it. Emma came back for a week with me, and I watched her more carefully than I ever had. Watched how she moved through the apartment, how she looked at walls and corners and especially at the floor. She seemed fine during the day, played with her toys, did her homework, laughed at cartoons. But at night, after I tucked her in and kissed her forehead, I'd stand in the hallway and listen. She talked in her sleep, mumbled words I couldn't quite make out. Sometimes she'd cry softly, and when I'd go in to comfort her, she'd be sitting up in bed, eyes open but not quite awake, staring at something I couldn't see. One night I asked her what was wrong, what she was seeing. She looked at me with those serious eyes and told me the girls under the floor were sad. They missed their families. They wanted to go home. I told her it was just a dream, just her imagination. There was nothing under the floor, nothing to be afraid of. She shook her head, told me I was wrong. The girls were there. They'd been there for a long time, and they were trying to tell her something important. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on, listening to the building settle around me, trying to convince myself my daughter was just having nightmares brought on by the stress of the divorce, by living in two different homes, by all the changes in her young life. But I kept thinking about those photographs hidden under her bed, about Ashley and Miranda, 12 and 13 years old, buried in concrete while their families searched desperately above them, about Ward Weaver living his life, going about his routine, sleeping in the apartment where he'd hidden their bodies. And I thought about what might remain after something like that, what kind of echoes such horror might leave behind. The knocking started on the fourth night of Emma's week with me. Soft at first, easy to dismiss as old pipes or settling foundation. But it had a rhythm. 3 slow knocks, a pause, then 2 quick ones. Over and over, coming from below, coming from apartment 1C. I went downstairs at 2 in the morning, stood outside the door of Ward Weaver's old apartment, and listened. The knocking had stopped. Everything was silent, but the door itself felt wrong somehow, cold in a way that didn't match the mild organ night. And when I put my hand on the wood, I swear I felt vibration. Not from sound, from something else. The door opened before I could knock. The woman who lived there now looked exhausted, her eyes shadowed, her hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She asked if I was the new tenant upstairs. I told her I was. She asked if I'd been hearing things. Knocking, footsteps, voices. I admitted I had. She invited me inside, and I shouldn't have accepted, but I did. I needed to see the apartment, needed to understand what I was dealing with. Ward Weaver's old home had been completely renovated. New paint, new floors, new fixtures. Nothing remained of whatever the space had looked like when he lived there. But standing in that living room, I felt the same wrongness I felt touching the door. The air was too still, the temperature too cold, and underneath the smell of fresh paint, there was something else. Something earthy and chemical and rotten. The woman, whose name was Catherine, told me she'd been living there for 6 months. At first, everything seemed fine. Normal apartment in a normal complex. But then her daughter started having nightmares, started seeing things. 2 girls who looked sad and frightened and desperately wanted help. Catherine had taken her daughter to therapists, to doctors. No one could find anything wrong. Just an overactive imagination, they said. Just normal childhood anxiety. But the nightmares got worse. And then Catherine started experiencing things too. The knocking that came from inside the walls. Footsteps when no one was walking. Shadows that moved wrong. And voices, soft and young and pleading, asking for help in whispers that seemed to come from beneath the floor. She researched the apartment, its history, found the same articles I had, learned about Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis, learned about where their bodies had been hidden, and realized she was living directly on top of their graves, even though the physical remains had been removed years ago. Some things leave permanent marks, Catherine told me. Some violence soaks so deep into a place that it becomes part of the foundation. And the girls weren't at rest. They were still there, still trapped, still trying to make someone understand. I asked what they wanted. Catherine, this expression went hollow. She said they wanted justice. Real justice. The kind that went beyond putting Ward Weaver in prison. She said there was another man. Someone who he helped. Someone who had known what Weaver was doing and did nothing to stop it. Someone who still lived in the complex, walking around free, while two murdered girls screamed from beneath the concrete. My blood went cold. I asked how she knew. Catherine pointed to the floor of her daughter's bedroom, the same layout as Emma's room above it. She pulled back the carpet. She said, found words carved into the concrete beneath, letters scratched deep, probably with a nail or piece of metal. Two names, Ashley and Miranda, and a third name I recognized immediately, the apartment manager, Donna. According to Catherine, the girls had scratched that name into the concrete before they died. Before Weaver sealed them in, they tried to leave a message, a clue, a way to make sure the truth came out. But the concrete had been painted over, carpeted, hidden for 20 years. Until Catherine, his daughter, started having nightmares and Catherine started tearing up the floor looking for answers. I didn't want to believe it. Couldn't process what it meant if it was true. Donna had been the manager during the murders, had access to every apartment, had known Ward Weaver, and if Ashley and Miranda had scratched her name into the concrete as they were dying, that meant something too horrible to fully accept. Catherine grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. She told me Donna was still here, still managing the complex, still watching, and she'd do anything to keep her secrets buried. I needed to leave, needed to get out of that apartment with its too cold air and its whispered voices and its floor that seemed to pulse with something awful. I thanked Catherine and practically ran back upstairs, my heart hammering, my mind racing. Emma was standing in the living room when I walked in. She shouldn't have been awake. It was past 3 a.m, but there she was in her pajamas, staring at me with an expression too knowing for a 9-year-old. She told me the girls had shown her things, had helped her understand. Donna had brought them to Ward Weaver, had known what he was going to do, had been paid to stay quiet afterward, and she'd been watching our apartment ever since we moved in, making sure no one discovered what Catherine had found. The photographs under Emma's bed hadn't been hidden by chance. Donna had planted them there. A warning, a message, stay quiet or end up like Ashley and Miranda. I grabbed my phone to call the police, to report everything, to get Emma out of this place immediately. But the screen wouldn't turn on. Dead battery, even though I decharged it an hour earlier. The landline was dead too, and when I looked out the window, I saw Donna standing in the parking lot, staring up at my apartment with an expression of cold calculation. She knew we figured it out, and she was going to make sure we never told anyone. I locked every door, checked every window, told Emma to stay in the bathroom where there were no exterior access points. Then I waited, listening to the building around me, hearing footsteps in the hallway that stopped outside my door. The knob turned slowly, locked. The footsteps moved away. I heard them descend the stairs, heard them enter apartment 1C below, heard Catherine scream. The scream cut off abruptly. Too abruptly. I had seconds to make a choice. Stay barricaded with Emma and hope the police eventually came, or go down there and stop whatever was happening before Catherine ended up like Ashley and Miranda. I am not a hero. Never claimed to be. I'm just a divorced father trying to do right by his daughter. But I couldn't let another person die in that apartment. Couldn't let Donna bury more bodies under more concrete. I told Emma to stay locked in the bathroom no matter what. Told her if I wasn't back in 10 minutes to break the window and scream for help. Then I grabbed the tire iron from my trunk and went downstairs. Apartment 1C, its door was open. The lights were off. I could hear movement inside, and underneath that, a sound like digging. Scraping, metal on concrete. Donna was in the bedroom where Catherine's daughter slept, where the words had been carved into the floor. She had a sledgehammer and was methodically destroying the concrete, breaking it into chunks, obliterating the message Ashley and Miranda had left behind. Catherine lay motionless against the wall, her daughter huddled in the corner, too terrified to move. Donna didn't look up when I entered, just kept swinging the hammer, each impact sending cracks spider webbing across the floor. She was strong for a woman in her 60s, strong and determined and completely focused on erasing the evidence. I told her to stop, Told her it was over. Told her the truth was already out and destroying the floor wouldn't change anything. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were empty. Dead inside in a way that made Ward Weaver seem almost human by comparison. She told me I didn't understand. Told me this complex was her life, her livelihood, her everything. When Ward had come to her 20 years ago with his problem, with 2 bodies he needed to hide, she made a business decision. He paid well, and she made sure no one looked too closely at the foundation of apartment 1C. She lived with that choice for 2 decades. Watched Ashley, Issa, and Miranda, whose families suffer. Watched the community tear itself apart searching. Watched the FBI dig up every inch of the complex except the one place that mattered. And she slept fine every night because monsters dawn to lose sleep over the people they destroy. But now Catherine had found the message. And I knew the truth. And Donna, this carefully constructed life was about to collapse. She raised the sledgehammer. Told me I'd be easier to bury than the girls had been. Told me no one would miss a desperate divorced father who obviously had a breakdown and attacked his neighbors before taking his own life. The floor beneath us cracked, not from the hammer, from something else. The concrete split in a line that hadn't been there before, and from that crack came cold air that smelled like earth and chemicals and death. The lights flickered, went out, came back on dimmer, tinged with something that wasn't quite right. And in the doorway stood 2 figures, young girls, 12 and 13 years old, wearing the same clothes they'd worn in the photographs. Ashley and Miranda, they weren't ghosts exactly. Too solid for that. Too present. They moved with purpose, with intelligence, with an anger that had been building for 20 years beneath concrete and carpet and lies. Donna saw them, dropped the hammer, started backing away, her empty eyes suddenly filled with something that might have been fear or might have been understanding that judgment had finally come. The girls didn't touch her. Didn't too. The floor beneath Donna's feet began to crack, concrete chunks falling away to reveal the earth below. The storage space where the bodies had been hidden. The grave that had held Ashley and Miranda for 3 years while their families searched desperately above. Donna fell, just dropped through the disintegrating floor like it was water. Her scream echoed from below, then cut off. The concrete reformed, sealed itself, became solid again as if it had never broken. Ashley and Miranda looked at me, at Catherine, at the terrified girl in the corner. Their expressions weren't threatening, just tired, so terribly tired. Then they faded, dissolved into air that smelled suddenly clean, like rain on pine trees, like the Oregon forest when everything is washed fresh. The police found Donna 3 days later when Catherine finally convinced them to excavate the floor of apartment 1C. She was buried in the same storage space where Ashley and Miranda had been hidden 20 years earlier. Crushed by fallen concrete. The official explanation was structural failure. An old building. Poor maintenance. Tragic accident. But they also found Ward Weaver's financial records buried with her. Evidence of payments. Proof of conspiracy. Documentation of everything Donna had done to help him hide his crimes. Ashley, Issa, and Miranda, whose families finally got complete truth. Complete justice. And the girls, wherever they are now, are finally at rest. I moved out of Newell Creek the day after they found Donna. Took Emma somewhere clean, somewhere without history, somewhere she could sleep without hearing whispers through the floor. She doesn't talk about the girls anymore. Doesn't have nightmares. Whatever connection they deformed with her broke when Donna fell through that floor and justice was finally served. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the house settles around us, I think about Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis. About 2 best friends who walked to a bus stop on ordinary mornings and never came home. About how they were buried beneath the feet of people who never knew. About how they waited 20 years for someone to hear them. And I think about the photographs hidden under Emma's bed. The message they were sending. The help they were asking for. Sometimes the dead dawn to rest. Sometimes they can not until the truth comes out and the monsters face consequences. Oregon City is a small town with a dark history. The Newell Creek apartments still stand, though most of the units are vacant now. No one wants to live in a place where such horror occurred. Where 2 girls were murdered and hidden and forgotten by everyone except the ones who killed them. But I'll never forget. And more importantly, Emma will never forget. She learned young that evil is real, that some people are monsters, and that sometimes the dead need help from the living to find peace. Those are hard lessons for a 9-year-old, but they read true ones. And truth, no matter how terrible, is always better than lies buried beneath concrete. Story 7. Coastal highway. The bandages were still wet when he pressed his face against my windshield. That's the image that wakes me up every night. Not the blood, not the screaming, not even the accident itself. Just those bandages, soaked red, dripping, wrapped around a face that shouldn't exist. A face that looked at me with eyes that had been dead for 50 years. I am telling you this because someone needs to know the truth about Highway 101. About what happens on that stretch of coastal road between Cannon Beach and Manzanita after midnight. About the thing they call the Bandage Man. And about why I'll never drive that highway again. My name is Robert Hayes. I am 47 years old. I work in construction. And 3 months ago, something happened to me on the Oregon coast that changed everything I thought I knew about reality. It was late September, off-season for tourists. The summer crowds had gone home. The beach towns were quiet. Just locals and a few stragglers like me. I'd been working a renovation job in Seaside. Old hotel, needed new plumbing and electrical. The kind of work that takes months and pays well. I was commuting from Portland every week. 3-hour drive each way. Not ideal, but the money was good and I needed it. Divorce had cleaned me out. Child support, alimony, legal fees. I was broke and getting older and this job was keeping me afloat. So I made the drive. Every Monday morning down to the coast. Every Friday night back to Portland. Highway 26 through the mountains. Then Highway 101 along the ocean. Beautiful drive during the day. Terrifying at night. That Friday, I left Seaside around 11. Later than usual. We'd been behind schedule all week and I stayed to finish a bathroom. The foreman wasn't happy, but I wanted the overtime. I grabbed a burger from a drive-thru, filled up my truck with gas, hit the road. Highway 101 northbound. The plan was to take it up to Highway 26 near Cannon Beach. Then cut inland through the mountains back to Portland. Simple route. I'd done it a dozen times. But that night was different. That night the fog rolled in. Thick, great. The kind of fog that swallows your headlights and makes the road disappear 10 feet in front of you. I slowed down, turned on my hazards, crept along at 30 miles per hour. The ocean was somewhere to my left. I could hear the waves, feel the salt in the air. But I couldn't see anything. Just fog, just the white line at the edge of the pavement. Just darkness. I was somewhere between Cannon Beach and Arch Cape when I saw the first car. Or what was left of it. Pulled off on the shoulder. Hazards blinking. The driver's door was open. Interior light on. But no driver. No passengers. Just an empty sedan with the engine still running. I slowed down even more. Looked for someone on the road. Someone who might need help. The fog shifted and I saw her. A woman. Standing at the edge of the trees. Just standing there, facing the forest. Not moving. Not looking at the road. Just staring into the darkness like she was watching something. I rolled down my window. Called out. Asked if she needed help. She didn't turn. Didn't respond. Just kept staring. And that's when I noticed what she was wearing. A nightgown. Bare feet. In September. In 40-degree weather. In the fog. Something was very wrong. I pulled over. Put my truck in park. Got out. The air felt thick. Heavy. Like breathing through wet cotton. I walked toward the woman. Called out again. She finally turned. And I wish she hadn't. Her face was blank. Completely blank. No expression. No recognition. Her eyes were open but empty. Like she was sleepwalking. Or like she wasn't really there at all. Just a shell. Just a body moving through motions it didn't understand. I asked her name. Asked if she was okay. Asked if she wanted me to call someone. She opened her mouth. For a second I thought she was going to speak. Then she pointed. Back toward the forest. Back toward the darkness. And she whispered one word. Run. That's when I heard it. The sound. Coming from the trees. A wet dragging. Like something heavy being pulled through mud. Accompanied by breathing. Ragged. Labored. The breathing of someone in pain. Or someone who had been in pain for a very long time and had gotten used to it. The woman turned and walked into the forest. Just walked straight into the trees. Into the fog. Into the darkness. I should have let her go. Should have gotten back in my truck and driven away. But I couldn't. Something about the way she said run. The terror in that whisper. I had to know what she was running from. I pulled out my phone. Turned on the flashlight. Followed her into the trees. The forest was dense. Old growth sitka spruce and hemlock. The kind of trees that have been here for centuries. The fog was worse under the canopy. It clung to everything. Made the beam of my flashlight useless. I could see maybe 5 feet ahead. The woman was gone. Vanished. But I could still hear that dragging sound. Closer now. And the breathing. Right behind me. I spun around. The light caught something. Movement. A figure. Tall. Shambling. Wrapped head to toe in bandages. Stained red. Some parts dark. Some parts fresh. Some parts still dripping. The figure lurched toward me. Arms outstretched. Fingers grasping. And I could see his face. Or what was left of it. The bandages were wrapped so tight they distorted his features. But underneath there was rot. There was decay. There was something that had been dead and buried and had somehow clawed its way back. I ran, crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my face, roots trying to trip me. The dragging sound followed. Never faster, never slower, just constant, relentless, like whatever was chasing me didn't need to hurry, like it knew I'd tire eventually, like it had all the time in the world. I broke through the tree line and stumbled onto the highway. My truck was 30 yards away. Hazards still blinking. Engine still running. I sprinted, got the door open, threw myself inside, slammed it shut, hit the locks. And that's when he appeared. Right in front of my windshield. The bandage man, standing in my headlights, staring at me with eyes that glowed with a light that wasn't natural. Wasn't alive. His mouth opened. The bandages split, and I saw what was underneath. Torn flesh, exposed muscle, teeth that had been broken and reset wrong. He pressed his hands against the glass, left red handprints, then he leaned forward, pressed his face against the windshield, and those wet bandages, those blood-soaked strips of cloth, they touched the glass right in front of my face. 6 inches away, I could see the weave of the fabric, could see the stains, could smell the rot even through the closed truck. I threw the truck into drive and hit the gas. The tires spun on the wet pavement. The truck fishtailed. For a horrible second, I thought I was going to crash. Then the tires caught and I shot forward, right through where the bandage man had been standing. But there was no impact, no thump, no body. He was just gone, vanished like he'd never been there, except for the handprints, the red handprints on my windshield. Still wet, still dripping. I drove, fast, too fast for the fog and the curves. But I didn't care. I had to get away, had to put distance between myself and that thing. That impossible thing that shouldn't exist but did. I didn't slow down until I hit Highway 26. Until I was inland. Until the fog thinned and I could see stars and I knew I was away from the coast. Away from whatever hunted that stretch of Highway 101. I didn't go to the police. What would I say? That I'd seen a dead logger wrapped in bandages? That he chased me through the woods? That he pressed his rotting face against my windshield? They think I was drunk? High. Crazy. So I went home, parked in my driveway, sat there for an hour trying to convince myself it had been a hallucination. Stress, exhaustion, too many long weeks and too many late nights. But the handprints were still there, on my windshield, red, sticky, and when I finally worked up the courage to touch them, they were real. They were blood. I washed the truck that night, 3 times, used bleach, used industrial cleaner, scrubbed until my hands were raw. The handprints came off, but I could still see them. Still see the shape of those fingers. Still see where he pressed his face against the glass. I didn't go back to work the next week. Called in sick. The foreman wasn't too happy, but I didn't care. I couldn't drive that highway again. Couldn't face that fog. Couldn't risk seeing him again. I spent the week researching, looking up urban legends, local ghost stories, trying to find some explanation. And I found it. The bandage man of Cannon Beach. The story went back decades. A logger in the 1950s. Working the coastal forests. There had been an accident. A widowmaker. A dead tree that fell wrong. Crushed him. Shredded him. Left him wrapped in makeshift bandages as they tried to get him to a hospital. He died on the way. Bled out on Highway 101. But according to the legend, he never left. His spirit haunted the coastal highway. Appeared to travelers, especially young couples and parked cars. Especially people alone. He'd bang on windows, leave bloody handprints, chase people into the forest. Most people thought it was just a story, something to scare teenagers. But I knew different. I knew he was real. I found forum posts, Reddit threads, local news articles, dozens of sightings over the years. People who'd seen him, people who'd been chased, people who'd crashed their cars trying to get away. And worse, people who'd disappeared. Last seen on Highway 101, cars found abandoned. Doors open, no bodies, just gone, like that woman in the nightgown. She was probably one of them. Probably taken, probably deep in those woods now, becoming part of whatever the bandage man was, whatever he'd become. The forum posts had theories. Some said he was collecting victims. building an army of the lost. Others said he was looking for someone, a specific person, someone who reminded him of whoever had wronged him in life, someone who could give him the revenge he'd been seeking for 70 years. I quit the job, told them I couldn't do it anymore, took the financial hit. The foreman called me a coward, said I ruined my reputation, said I'd never work on the coast again. I didn't care. Money wasn't worth dying for. Money wasn't worth becoming another missing person poster, another unsolved mystery, another story for the internet to dissect and dismiss. I stayed in Portland, found local work, smaller jobs, less pay, but at least I could sleep. At least I didn't have to drive Highway 101. At least I didn't have to watch for fog rolling in off the ocean, for figures standing at the edge of the trees, for wet bandages pressed against glass. But here is the thing. Here is what I didn't expect. He followed me, not physically, not in the way you think, but he's in my head now, in my dreams. I see him every night, standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me with those glowing eyes, reaching for me with those bandaged hands. Sometimes I wake up and there are handprints on my bedroom window. Fresh, red, impossible. I wash them off, but they come back. Every few nights, always the same, 5 fingers, always reaching, always trying to get in. I've tried everything. Salt, sage, religious symbols. Nothing works, because he is not just a ghost. He is something else, something older, something that exists in the space between myth and reality, between story and truth, between warning and prophecy. The locals on the coast knew about him. They always known. That is why they dawned to drive Highway 101 after dark. That is why they warn their kids to stay away from Cannon Beach at night. That is why there are so many missing person cases along that stretch of road. Cases that never get solved. Bodies that never get found. The bandaged man I sent to just a legend. He is a predator, a hunter, and Highway 101 is his territory. The fog is his cover. The forest is his den. And the people who disappear, they re his collection, his trophies, his eternal company, and whatever hell he has created for himself in those woods. I'm writing this because I think he is coming for me. The handprints are getting more frequent every night now. And last night I heard dragging outside my house. That same wet sound, that same labored breathing. He has found me, tracked me, followed me 3 hours inland from the coast. Distance doesn't matter to him. Once he marks you, once you see him, once you look into those eyes, you re his forever. I don't know how much time I have. Days, maybe, hours. But I wanted someone to know the truth, to understand what really happens on Highway 101, to know that the bandaged man I sent, just a story parents tell to keep their teenagers out of trouble. He is real. He is hunting, and he never stops. If you ever driving the Oregon coast late at night, if you see fog rolling in, if you see a car abandoned on the shoulder, if you see someone standing at the edge of the trees, Don, to stop, Don, to help, Don, to even slow down. Just drive fast, drive far, and pray that he hasn't marked you. Because once those bandages touch your window, once that face presses against your glass, once those eyes meet yours, you're already gone. You just don't know it yet. The wet bandages were still dripping when he pressed his face against my windshield. And now they repressed against my bedroom window. Every single night, waiting, watching, coming closer. And soon, very soon, I'll be pressed against something else. Against my door, against my skin, against whatever boundary separates the living from the dead. And when that happens, when he finally reaches me, I'll become just another story, another legend, another warning that nobody believes, until it's too late. Story 8, rest stop. I should have kept driving. That is what I tell myself now, late at night, when I can, to sleep. When I hear the tapping, always the tapping, but you need to understand something first. When they've been on the road for 14 hours straight, when your eyes are burning and your hands are cramping on the wheel, when you somewhere on Interstate 5 between nothing and nowhere in the middle of Oregon at 3 in the morning, you don't think clearly. You just react. And when you see that rest stop sign glowing in your headlights, promising bathrooms and vending machines and a chance to splash cold water on your face, you take it. You always take it. I was hauling furniture from Seattle down to Sacramento. Independent contractor work, the kind of job where you're your own boss, which sounds great until you realize it means you're also your own mechanic, your own accountant, and your own worst enemy when it comes to knowing when to stop. I'd been pushing it. I knew I'd been pushing it, but the load was worth good money, and I had bills stacking up at home. My ex-wife was making noise about overdue child support again, so I drank gas station coffee and chewed caffeine gum and told myself I'd stop when I really needed to. The sign appeared out of the darkness like a gift. Rest area, 2 miles. I don't even remember making the decision to take the exit. My body just did it, like my hands and feet were operating on their own. The off-ramp curved away from the interstate, and suddenly the sound of traffic disappeared behind me. Just like that. 1 second I could hear the distant whine of semis and late-night travelers. The next there was only the rumble of my own engine and the crunch of gravel under my tires. The rest stop was bigger than I expected. Not one of those little pull-offs with 2 parking spaces and a bathroom that smells like a crime scene. This was a proper facility. A long parking lot with diagonal spaces. A squat brick building with the men, this room on one side, women, this on the other. Vending machines glowing under a pavilion. Picnic tables, an information board with maps behind scratched plexiglass. But here is the thing. Here is the first thing that should have sent me back to my truck and back onto the highway. The parking lot was completely empty. Not a single car, not a single semi, just me. In 20 years of long-haul driving, I'd never seen a rest stop on I-5 completely deserted. Never. There was always someone. Always a trucker catching 4 hours of sleep in his cab. Always a family with screaming kids and a minivan full of luggage. Always somebody. But not here. Not tonight. The sodium lights hummed overhead, casting that sickly orange glow over everything. The kind of light that makes everyone look dead already. I should have kept driving, but I was so tired. My bladder felt like it was going to burst. My back was screaming. I just needed 10 minutes. 10 minutes to use the bathroom, grab a soda, walk around a little. Then I could get back on the road. I could push through to Sacramento. I could collect my money and sleep for a week. That's what I told myself as I parked and killed the engine. The silence that rushed in to fill the space was enormous. Oppressive. The kind of quiet that feels like it is waiting for something. I climbed out of the cab. The October air hit me like a cold slap. Oregon nights get brutal in the fall, especially out here in the middle of nowhere. I could see my breath. I could see the dark wall of pine trees pressing in on all sides of the rest stop, like the forest was trying to reclaim this little patch of civilization. Somewhere in those trees, an owl called out, low and mournful. Then nothing. The men's room door was one of those heavy metal things designed to take abuse from 1,000 travelers. It swung open with a squeal that echoed off the tile walls inside. Automatic lights flickered on, buzzing and stuttering like angry insects. Everything was that industrial beige color that exists only in public bathrooms and prisons. The air smelled like industrial cleaner trying and failing to mask something worse underneath. I did my business fast. The whole time, I had this crawling sensation on the back of my neck. That feeling you get when you alone, but your brain is convinced someone is watching you. I kept glancing at the mirror above the sinks, expecting to see someone standing behind me. But there was only my own reflection, looking as exhausted and paranoid as I felt. When I came back outside, I noticed something I missed before. There was a cork bulletin board next to the information kiosk. Usually these things have tourist brochures and safety warnings about wildlife. This one had something else. Missing person flyers. A lot of them. I walked closer, drawn by curiosity I didn't fully understand. The flyers were weathered, some so faded by sun and rain that the faces were barely visible. But others were newer, much newer. I counted 8. 8 different people, all women, all between the ages of 20 and 40. All last seen somewhere along Interstate 5. My hands started to shake. Not from the cold. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but there was no signal. Not even one bar. That's when I noticed the dates. The most recent flyer was from 3 weeks ago. A woman named Jennifer Holloway, 28 years old, brown hair, green eyes, last seen at a rest stop near Roseburg. The flyer said she'd been traveling alone from Portland to San Francisco. She called her sister from a rest stop to say she was taking a break. She never made it back to her car. I looked at the parking lot. Still empty. Still just my truck sitting there under those dead orange lights. Jennifer Holloway's car had probably sat in one of those same spaces 3 weeks ago. She probably walked through the same bathroom door I just used. She probably stood right where I was standing, looking at the same bulletin board, maybe even seeing flyers of the women who disappeared before her. And then something happened. Something that meant she never got back in her car. Something that meant her face ended up on a flyer for the next person to see. That's when I heard it. The tapping, light, rhythmic, coming from somewhere behind the bathroom building. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. I told myself it was just a branch hitting the side of the building. Just the wind. But there was no wind. The October night was perfectly still. The trees weren't moving. My breath was coming out in small clouds that hung in the air like ghosts. Tap, 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 closer now. Or maybe I was just more aware of it. The sound had a pattern to it. Deliberate. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 pause. Like someone signaling. Like someone trying to communicate. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in my truck and drive. Forget the soda. Forget stretching my legs. Just go. But here is the thing about being alone in a place like this. Your curiosity becomes its own kind of trap. You tell yourself you need to know what is making that sound. You tell yourself it's probably nothing. You tell yourself that running from shadows is what cowards do. And you're not a coward. You're a grown man. You're 6'2" and 200 pounds. What's the worst that could happen? I walked toward the sound, around the side of the bathroom building. The sodium lights didn't reach back here. Just darkness and the black wall of trees about 20 feet away. The tapping was louder now. Definitely coming from the tree line. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap, tap. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating pine trunks and undergrowth and something else. Something that didn't belong. A piece of fabric, pale blue, tied to a low branch, moving in a breeze I couldn't feel. Tap, tap, tap against the branch above it. That was the sound. Just fabric. Just cloth tapping against wood. Nothing sinister. Nothing supernatural. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud at myself for being so spooked. Just a piece of trash someone had tied to a tree for some reason. Maybe a trail marker. Maybe kids playing around. I walked closer, 10 feet from the tree line now. The flashlight beam illuminated more of the fabric. It wasn't trash. It was a shirt. A woman's shirt. Pale blue with small white flowers. And it wasn't tied to the branch. It was hooked on the branch. Caught, like someone had run through the trees and the fabric had snagged and ripped and stayed behind while the person kept running. Or while something dragged them deeper into the forest. My blood turned to ice water. I swung the flashlight beam wider, scanning the tree line. The light caught something else. 30 feet to the left. Another piece of fabric. This one red. A scarf maybe. And beyond that, was that a shoe? I couldn't tell. The forest was too thick. The darkness too complete. But I could see enough to know that these weren't two random pieces of trash. These were breadcrumbs. These were the things people left behind when something very bad happened to them. I backed away from the trees. Fast. My heel caught on something and I almost went down. When I looked, I saw what I tripped on. A ground-level vent for the bathroom building. Metal grating. And behind the grating, in the darkness of the ventilation shaft, two pale crescents. Reflecting my flashlight. Eyes. Someone was in there. Someone was crouched in the ventilation shaft behind the bathroom building, watching me through the grating. I ran. I'm not ashamed to say it. I turned and I ran back to the parking lot. My boots slapping on the pavement, my breath tearing out of my lungs. Behind me, I heard the squeal of metal on metal, the vent grating being pushed open, and then footsteps, running footsteps, following me. I got to my truck and grabbed the door handle. Locked. I delocked it. Of course I delocked it. You always lock it when you park in strange places. But now my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key fob out of my pocket. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear breathing, ragged and wet. I got the door open and threw myself inside and slammed it shut and hit the lock button. Then I looked in the rearview mirror. The parking lot was empty. No one running toward me. No one at all. Just empty pavement and sodium lights and that brick building in the dark forest pressing in on all sides. The footsteps had stopped. The breathing had stopped, like someone had hit a pause button. I sat there in my truck, engine off, heart hammering, staring at the empty parking lot behind me. Had I imagined it? Was I so exhausted that I hallucinated the whole thing? The eyes in the vent, the footsteps, maybe the caffeine and the lack of sleep had finally caught up with me. Maybe I was losing it. Then I saw the note, tucked under my windshield wiper, a piece of paper folded in half. It hadn't been there when I parked. I was sure of that. Absolutely sure. Someone had put it there in the few minutes I'd been walking around. Someone had approached my truck while I was looking at those missing person flyers and hearing that tapping and finding that torn shirt in the trees. Someone had been close enough to touch my vehicle. I couldn't see what was written on the note from inside the cab. I'd have to get out to retrieve it. Every fiber of my being was screaming not to just start the engine and drive. But I had to know. I had to see what it said. I opened the door slowly. The interior light seemed impossibly bright. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I grabbed the note as fast as I could and pulled back inside, slamming the door and locking it again. The paper was damp. From the night air, maybe? Or from someone's sweaty hands. I unfolded it. The message was written in pencil. Shaky letters, like someone had written it in a moving vehicle or while their hands were trembling. It said, "He watches from the trees. He takes them one by one. If you see the smile, it is already too late. Drive north, Don, to stop, Don, to look back." The smile. I thought about those missing person flyers. 8 women, all vanished along I-5. And then I remembered something I'd read years ago. Something about a serial killer who operated in the Pacific Northwest in the 90s. A long-haul truck driver. He killed women at rest stops along Interstate 5. He taunted police with letters. Letters signed with a smiley face. They called him the Happy Face Killer. Keith Hunter Jesperson. They caught him eventually. Sent him to prison for life. That was decades ago. He was locked up. Wasn't he? I looked at the note again. Drive north? But north would take me back towards Seattle. Away from Sacramento. Away from my delivery. Away from the money I needed. I was south of Roseburg. I knew that much. Maybe another 2 hours from the California border. If I turned around now, I'd lose the job. I'd lose the money. My ex would take me back to court. But if I kept going south, if I stayed on I-5, those women on the flyers had stayed on I-5. And now they were gone. I started the engine. The diesel rumbled to life. And I'd never been so grateful for that sound. For something mechanical and normal and under my control. I put the truck in gear. I had to decide, north or south, safety or money, life or stupidity. The decision should have been obvious. But I sat there for a full minute, hands on the wheel, staring at the empty rest stop in my headlights. That is when I saw him, standing at the edge of the parking lot, right where the pavement met the tree line. A man, tall, wearing what looked like a maintenance worker, his coverall. In his hand, something long and metallic, a tire iron maybe, or a crowbar, but it was his face that made my stomach drop, even from 40 feet away. Even in the bad light, I could see he was smiling, a wide, stretched grin that looked more like a wound than an expression of joy. He raised one hand, waved at me, slow, deliberately, like he knew me, like we were old friends. Then he turned and walked into the trees, just melted into that darkness like he was part of it, like the forest had opened up and swallowed him whole. I drove north. I drove so fast my truck shuddered. I got back on I-5 and I pushed the accelerator down and I didn't slow down until I saw the lights of Eugene. By then, the sun was starting to come up, gray dawn light making everything look washed out and unreal. I pulled into a truck stop, a real one, bright lights and security cameras and a dozen other vehicles. I went inside and bought coffee and sat in a booth and tried to stop shaking. The waitress asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, just tired, just a long night. She didn't look convinced. I called the company and told them I couldn't make the delivery. Equipment trouble. They weren't happy, but I didn't care. I drove straight home, 12 hours back to Seattle. I didn't stop except for gas. I barely blinked. And every time I checked my mirrors, I was looking for that smile. That was 6 weeks ago. I haven't taken a long-haul job since. I've been doing local deliveries, day shifts only, never on the highway after dark. People ask me what happened, why I turned down good money, why I look over my shoulder now, why I wake up at 3 in the morning drenched in sweat. I tell them nothing happened. I tell them I'm just getting older, slowing down, maybe thinking about a career change. They nod. They understand. Everyone gets tired eventually. But here is what I done to tell them. Here. That's what keeps me awake. 2 weeks after that night, another woman went missing. Rest stop on I-5, south of Roseburg. 26 years old, red hair, traveling alone. Last phone call to her boyfriend saying she was stopping to use the bathroom. They found her car in the parking lot. Keys in the ignition, purse on the passenger seat. But no sign of her, just like all the others. And when they posted her missing person flyer, Someone drew something on it in pencil. In the corner, small, almost hidden, a smiley face. The police say it's probably a copycat. Someone who knows about the happy face killer and is playing sick games. Jesperson is still in prison. Has been for 30 years. It can be him. But here is what the police done. Here is what I never reported because who would believe me? That man I saw at the rest stop. The one with the smile. He looked exactly like the pictures of Keith Hunter Jesperson from the 90s. Exactly. Same height, same build, same face. Like time had stopped for him. Like he found a way to keep hunting even after they locked him away. I know how that sounds. I know how insane that sounds. But I also know what I saw. And I know that I left a note tucked under my own windshield wiper the next day. Same shaky handwriting. Same warning. He watches from the trees. He takes them one by one. If you see the smile, it is already too late. Drive north. Don. T-stop. Don. To look back. I done. Do you know who? I'll find it. Maybe no one. Maybe it will blow away in the wind. Or maybe it'll save someone's life. Maybe someone else will pull into that rest stop at 3 a.m. Maybe they'll be tired and alone and desperate for a break. Maybe they'll see the missing person flyers. Maybe they'll hear the tapping. Maybe they'll find my note before they see the smile. And maybe, just maybe, I'll make the right choice. The choice I almost didn't make. I'll get back in their vehicle and they'll drive north and they will live to see another day. Because I'm telling you right now, I'm telling you with everything I have, if you ever driving I-5 through Oregon late at night, if you retired and you see a rest stop that looks too empty, too quiet, too wrong, if you stop and you hear tapping in the trees, if you see torn fabric and missing shoes and eyes watching from the darkness, if you find a note on your windshield, listen to it, believe it, drive away. Because some rest stops, Aaron, they're there to give you a break from the road. Some rest stops are there to make sure you never leave. And that smile, that terrible, knowing smile, it's not a warning. It is a promise. And once you see it, it never really goes away. I still see it sometimes. When I am driving, when I am trying to sleep, in the faces of strangers, in the shadows at the edge of my vision, always watching, always waiting, always smiling. I should have kept driving. And if you ever find yourself in a place like that, so should you.
Thank you for visiting to Midnight Whisper Stories. I am the creator of this channel, where every dark story is designed to help you escape the noise of the day and immerse yourself in worlds that spark your imagination. I write every script, design every image, hear voice actors to bring my stories to life, and edit everything myself. So sit back, relax, and let the whispers of the night guide you.